Imagine a human trait that should have been erased by simple pressure. Tools made for the right hand, weapons held by the right hand, classrooms correcting the left hand, and generations quietly rewarding sameness. Yet left-handedness did not disappear. It stayed, not as a mistake, but as a small, persistent question carried inside the human body. What kind of advantage can survive when the world keeps pushing against it? Why shouldn't left-handed people exist, but 10% of humans still are? Left-handed people live inside a quiet contradiction. They are not rare enough to be called accidents, but they are never common enough to shape the world around them. In most families, classrooms, workshops, and tool designs, the right hand silently becomes the expected hand. A cup handle, scissors, a desk arm, a computer mouse, a line of writing moving across a page, even the way two people shake hands, all seem to assume that one side of the body will lead and the other will follow. For a right-handed person, this assumption is almost invisible. For a left-handed person, it can appear again and again, in small frictions that do not always hurt, but never fully disappear. This is what makes the question so strange. If human beings are shaped by long histories of survival, practice, imitation, and inherited development, why would a trait that so often meets resistance remain so steady in the human population? The puzzle begins with the simple fact that humans are not evenly divided between the two hands. Across many populations, left-handedness appears as a minority pattern, often described around 1 person in 10, though the exact number changes with age, culture, definition, and measurement. That caution matters. It is safer to think of the figure not as a fixed law carved into biology, but as a broad pattern that keeps returning when researchers look at large groups of people. The deeper point is not the exact percentage. The deeper point is that the minority persists. It appears in different societies, across languages, and under different customs. It appears even where the left hand has been discouraged. It appears even when children are trained to use the right hand instead. Something in human development keeps allowing this variation to come back. To understand why, we need to begin far earlier than schools, desks, and handwriting. We need to return to the origin of human action, to the moment when our ancestors were not writing names or holding pens, but reaching, gripping, cutting, carrying, throwing, scraping, and making tools from stone, wood, bone, and fibre. The human hand became an important bridge between the brain and the outside world. Through the hand, intention became pressure, thought became movement, need became tool use. In that long beginning, a preferred hand was not a lifestyle detail. It was part of how the body organized work. When a person used one hand more often for precise action, the brain and muscles could become practiced in a stable pattern. In a species that learned by watching others, the majority pattern would have mattered. Children could copy adults more easily when bodies moved in similar ways. Tools could be passed from one hand to another with fewer adjustments. Shared work could become smoother when most people expected the same leading side. From this angle, right-handedness looks like the kind of pattern that should reinforce itself. Once most people use the right hand, objects, habits, and teaching can bend toward the right hand, making the majority even easier to maintain. That is why left-handedness feels like a loose thread in the fabric of human evolution. It is not impossible, but it is inconvenient. It is not harmful in a simple way, but it asks the body to live in a world arranged for the other side, and yet it has not vanished. This does not mean left-handed people carry a hidden destiny, or that the left hand is a sign of superiority. Such claims are too simple, and often go beyond what evidence can support. The more careful thought is quieter. Perhaps evolution did not remove left-handedness because it was never only a cost. Perhaps the same human world that rewarded similarity also left room for difference. Humans are cooperative, but not perfectly uniform. We inherit bodies that follow patterns, yet those patterns leave margins. In those margins, the left hand remained. The number often attached to left-handedness is simple enough to remember, but it should not be treated as if every society, every century, and every age group has always shown the same proportion. A careful way to say it is this: left-handed people seem to form a small but persistent minority, commonly estimated near 1/10 of the population in many modern studies, While the precise figure can shift depending on how the question is asked, that caution matters because the history of handedness is not only a story about biology, it is also a story about measurement. A person may write with the right hand because a teacher forced the change, yet still prefer the left hand for throwing, cutting, stirring, or reaching. Another person may use both hands for different tasks, not because the body has no preference, but because life has trained one hand in one skill and the other hand in another. When researchers ask which hand someone writes with, they may get a different answer than if they ask about eating, throwing, or using a knife. In a modern classroom, writing can look like the clearest sign. In the deeper human past, writing did not exist for most of our story. The first human question was not which hand held a pen, but which hand shaped a tool, prepared food, lifted a child, carried material, or made a repeated movement with control. This matters because the origin of handedness reaches back into the body before it reaches the page. Long before names were written, the human nervous system was organizing movement. One hand could become practiced at precise work, while the other supported, held, steadied, or balanced the action. That division does not require a written language. It requires a body that repeats tasks, a brain that learns from repetition, and a social world where actions are copied. The rough figure of 1 in 10 is therefore not a magic number. It is a clue. It tells us that left-handedness is not simply noise, because noise would wander without pattern. It also tells us that left-handedness is not the dominant pattern, because the right-handed majority remains strong across many observations. The careful position sits between those two extremes. Left-handedness is a recurring human variation, not a universal rule and not a random error. Culture can hide it. Culture can exaggerate or suppress its visibility, but culture has not erased it completely. This is where the paradox becomes more interesting. In many places and periods, being left-handed was not merely inconvenient. It could be corrected, discouraged, or described with negative meanings. Children might learn to present the right hand in public even if the left hand felt natural in private. Older records may therefore undercount left-handedness, not because fewer left-handed bodies existed, but because fewer people were allowed to show it openly. Modern numbers can rise when social pressure falls, not because evolution suddenly changes in one generation, but because the same bodies are counted differently. This reminds us to move slowly. When we look at percentages, we are not looking directly into prehistoric life. We are looking through filters of language, custom, schooling, tools, and survey questions. Still, beneath those filters, a pattern remains visible. Most people develop a right-hand preference. A smaller group develops a left-hand preference. Some people fall between those categories. The persistence of that smaller group is the real mystery. If right-handedness made daily life easier in shared environments, and if societies later built tools, rituals, and writing systems around the right hand, then left-handedness should have faced pressure from biology and culture. Yet each generation continued to produce left-handed children. That means the answer cannot be found only in desks, scissors, or handwriting. It must be sought in older layers of human development, where genes, brain organization, chance, learning, and social life meet before a child ever knows one side of the world expects them to be different. Evolution does not work like a clean machine removing every inconvenience. It does not polish a species until every body matches the same design. Still, over long stretches of time, traits that create strong disadvantages tend to shrink, especially when those disadvantages affect survival, mating, learning, cooperation, or raising children. That is why left-handedness invites such a careful question. If the human world has leaned toward the right hand for so long, why did the left-handed minority not fade into history? The first answer is that a disadvantage must be strong and consistent before it can be removed easily. Many left-handed people can live, learn, work, care for children, make tools, and participate in society. Their difference may create friction, but friction is not the same as failure. A stone tool held awkwardly can still cut. A child corrected in writing can still grow. A hand that does not match the majority can still become skilled. In the deep origin of our species, survival depended on many overlapping abilities, not on a single detail of preference. A person needed food, shelter, social bonds, memory, timing, and the ability to learn from others. A preferred left hand may have mattered in some situations, but it was rarely the whole story of a life. Evolution often leaves room for traits that are not perfect. As long as they are workable, the human body itself is full of compromises. Our backs carry the cost of walking upright. Our births are difficult because large-brained infants pass through a narrow pelvis. Our teeth, knees, shoulders, and sleep patterns carry signs of history rather than ideal design. Left-handedness may belong to that family of variation, not an error that must be erased, but a pattern that survives because its costs are limited or balanced. The question becomes deeper when we remember that handedness is not just a visible habit. It grows out of brain organization, early development, and inherited tendencies that do not follow rules. A child is not assembled from an instruction sheet that says right or left in one clear line. Development is more like a quiet unfolding, shaped by biology, timing, and small variation. Some tendencies run in families, yet family history does not predict every child. Twins can differ. Parents and children can differ. The same household can produce different hand preferences. Left-handedness may continue partly because the processes that build a nervous system naturally create variation. Removing it completely might not be possible without changing deeper systems that help the brain organize language, movement, and skilled action. In other words, the left-handed child may not be a break from human nature, but one of the ways nature keeps appearing. There is also the social side of the puzzle. Human beings are group-living animals, and group life rewards shared patterns. But group life also changes the value of rarity. A movement that is unusual can be inconvenient in a workshop, yet unexpected in a contest. A left-handed action may be harder for others to predict because most people have practiced against right-handed movement. This idea must be handled gently. It does not prove that left-handedness survived because of fighting alone, and it does not turn left-handed people into natural warriors. Human life has never been only combat. But it suggests a possible balance. The minority pattern that faces costs in a right-handed world may carry advantages in direct interactions, especially when rarity itself changes expectations. Over generations, small costs and advantages can hold each other in tension. Left-handedness did not need to be superior to survive. It only needed not to be fatal. It only needed to be woven into development strongly enough that each generation still produced it. The strange minority remained because evolution is not a courtroom delivering one final verdict. Somewhere inside a landscape of bodies, families, tools, and societies, the left hand kept finding enough space to move. The human body looks balanced. At first glance, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 hands. A child looking at the body from the outside might imagine that both sides are simply copies of each other divided neatly down the middle. But the deeper we look, the more this symmetry begins to soften. The heart sits slightly to one side, the liver is not matched by another liver on the opposite side. The lungs are not identical in shape. Even the face, which seems so balanced when seen quickly, carries small differences from left to right. Human beings are symmetrical enough to move through the world with stability, but not symmetrical enough to be built like a mirror. This matters because handedness is one visible expression of a wider biological truth. The body is not only a shape, it is an organized system of action. 2 hands may look similar, but they do not always enter life with the same role. One hand often becomes the hand of fine control, timing, and repeated skill. The other hand often becomes the hand of support, pressure, and balance. When a person cuts food, ties a knot, shapes a tool, writes a word, or threads a needle, the action is rarely divided equally. One hand leads the delicate movement, while the other creates the stable world in which that movement can happen. This division is so ordinary that we may not notice it, yet it reaches back toward the beginning of human life, and further still into the history of primate bodies. Our ancestors did not need to be perfectly symmetrical to survive. They needed bodies that could coordinate movement, grasp objects, climb, carry, prepare food, and later make tools with increasing precision. In such a body, perfect equality between the 2 hands may not have been the most useful arrangement. A repeated preference can make action smoother. If the same hand is used again and again for the most precise task, the nervous system can refine that pathway. practice deepens control. Muscles learn patterns. The brain becomes better at predicting the result of movement. The supporting hand also learns its own quiet skill, because holding steady is not the same as doing nothing. When early humans worked with stone, plant fiber, wood, hide, or bone, this kind of cooperation between the two hands would have mattered. One hand could strike, scrape, twist, or shape. The other could hold the material at the right angle. The useful unit was not the right hand alone or the left hand alone, but the whole body working with an uneven rhythm. That uneven rhythm helps explain why handedness should not be imagined as a simple flaw. It is part of how a complex body organizes work. The puzzle is not that humans have a leading hand. The puzzle is that the leading hand is usually the right, but not always. If the body only needed one dominant side, either side could have become common in equal measure. But human populations show a strong tilt toward right-handedness, with a smaller left-handed minority that remains. This tells us that asymmetry itself is normal, while the direction of asymmetry is the question. The body can be uneven without being broken. In fact, unevenness may be one of the ways a living system becomes efficient. A perfectly balanced body in appearance can still have specialized roles inside. The two sides do not need to compete for equality in every action. They need to cooperate well enough for life to continue. This is why left-handedness sits at the doorway of a much larger subject. It asks us to think not only about hands, but about how the human body became divided into roles. It asks how an ancient creature with two similar arms became a tool-making animal whose actions were guided by preference, repetition, and learned control. It asks why one side came to lead for most people, and why the other side continued to lead for some. The answer begins with a simple observation. Nature often builds usefulness, not through perfect symmetry, but through a quiet, functional imbalance. The reason one hand usually becomes more skilled than the other is not found in the hand alone. It begins in the nervous system, where the body is mapped, guided, corrected, and remembered. Each hand may look like a simple tool at the end of the arm, but every careful movement depends on an enormous quiet conversation between muscles, nerves, senses, and the brain. When a person reaches for a cup, the hand does not simply move forward. The eyes judge distance. The shoulder adjusts. The fingers prepare before touching the object. The brain predicts weight before the cup is lifted. If the cup is heavier than expected, the grip changes almost instantly. A hand preference is therefore not just a habit on the surface. It is a repeated pathway through the body's control system. One of the strangest features of this control system is that the brain and body are crossed. The left side of the brain is strongly involved in controlling the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain is strongly involved in controlling the left side. This does not mean each half works alone. The brain is deeply connected across its two hemispheres, but the crossing is real, and it helps us understand why handedness is tied to deeper patterns of organization. For many people, the left hemisphere is especially important for language and certain kinds of skilled sequencing. The same side of the brain also controls the right hand. This has led scientists to ask whether right-handedness and language became linked during human evolution, as our ancestors became more dependent on communication, planning, and tool use. The answer is not simple, and it should not be treated as settled in every detail. Not every right-handed person has the same brain organization, and not every left-handed person is the reverse of a right-handed person. Many left-handed people still have language mainly organized in the left hemisphere. Human biology is more flexible than a clean diagram. Still, the broad connection between brain asymmetry, hand preference, and skilled action gives us a careful path into the mystery. Long before modern writing, the human lineage depended on actions that had to occur in order. A stone was selected, turned, struck, checked, and struck again. A hide was held, scraped, pulled, and prepared. Food was cut, carried, shared, and stored. These actions were not random movements, they were sequences. A body that could repeat precise sequences had an advantage in making tools, preparing materials, and passing knowledge to others. Once the brain began organizing repeated skilled actions more strongly through one side, a preferred hand could become part of that larger system. The right hand may have become common not because the right hand itself was magic, but because many nervous systems developed a pattern in which the left hemisphere handled certain organized actions, while the right hand became the more practiced instrument for carrying them out. Yet this still does not erase the left hand. Development is never a factory line producing identical results. A brain grows through genetic influence, early movement, chemical signals, timing, and small variations that begin before birth. Even in the womb, fetuses can show preferences in movement, though such early signs do not always predict later handedness perfectly. After birth, touch, practice, imitation, and task demands continue shaping the pattern. The child does not choose handedness in one clear moment. The body slowly settles into a way of acting. For most people, that settlement favors the right. For some, it favors the left. For others, it remains mixed across tasks. This is important because it prevents us from turning handedness into a simple label. A left-handed person is not merely someone whose left hand is stronger. Often, the whole pattern of control, timing, comfort, and prediction has settled differently. The left hand becomes the hand that feels ready before the mind has to explain why. It reaches first. It steadies thought through movement. It becomes the familiar bridge between intention and the world. From the beginning of human action, that bridge mattered. The hand that shaped a tool, lifted food, or copied an elder's gesture was not acting separately from the brain. It was the visible end of an invisible organization. And because that organization is biological, developmental, and social at the same time, it can lean strongly in one direction without becoming absolute. Most humans become right-handed because the body and brain often settle that way. Some remain left-handed because the same human system still allows another path to form. Handedness is easy to mistake for a small preference, like choosing one path around a tree instead of another. But when we watch it more closely, it becomes something deeper. A preferred hand is not only the hand that performs a task, it is the hand the body trusts first. It is the hand that reaches before thought becomes language. It is the hand that catches a falling object, points toward a sound, begins a drawing, opens a door, or steadies a tool. In this quiet speed, handedness reveals itself as more than choice. It is a sign of how the nervous system has arranged action before the conscious mind has time to explain it. This is why left-handedness cannot be understood only by looking at the fingers, the wrist, or the strength of the arm. The hand is visible, but the organization behind it is hidden. A person may learn to write with the right hand under pressure, yet still reach with the left when startled. A person may cut with one hand, throw with another, or use different hands for different kinds of skill. These mixed patterns remind us that the human body is not a simple machine with one switch marked left or right. It is a living system that settles through repetition, comfort, coordination, and memory. For early humans, such organization would have been woven into ordinary survival. A hand preference would not appear as an identity or a social label. It would appear in the rhythm of work. The same hand would reach for a stone again. The same hand would guide the sharper edge. The same hand would learn the angle of pressure needed to scrape, twist, strike, or carry. Over time, the body would become familiar with its own pattern. This familiarity matters because skilled action depends on prediction. The brain prepares movement before the movement is complete. It estimates weight, distance, resistance, and timing. The more often one hand performs the precise role, the more practiced that prediction becomes. The other hand is not useless in this arrangement. It may hold, brace, turn, or receive. In many tasks, the supporting hand gives the leading hand a stable world to act upon. Human skill often grows from this unequal cooperation. One side refines movement, the other creates steadiness. This helps explain why a dominant hand is not a defect in symmetry, but a practical solution for a tool-using animal. Still, the original puzzle remains untouched. If an uneven body is useful, why does the unevenness point right for most people and left for a smaller number? The answer is likely not a single cause. It may involve inherited tendencies, brain development, early movement, cultural learning, and chance. The important point here is that left-handedness belongs inside the same system as right-handedness. It is not outside human design. It is not a separate category of person. It is another outcome of the human nervous system organizing itself for skilled action. In a species whose history began with grasping, carrying, making, and learning from others, the preferred hand became one of the body's quiet signatures. It told no story by itself, but it left traces in movement. It shaped how a child copied an elder. It shaped how tools were held. It shaped how daily tasks felt in the muscles before they became visible in culture. The right-handed majority may have made shared learning easier, because most people could copy a familiar direction of movement, but the left-handed minority shows that shared learning never required complete sameness. Human groups could carry a strong pattern without turning every body into that pattern. The body does not always preserve difference because difference is dramatic. Sometimes it preserves difference because life can tolerate more than one workable arrangement. The left hand survived as one of those arrangements, rooted inside the same ancient system that made human hands so important. The oldest evidence for human-handedness does not speak in words. It lies in marks, edges, angles, and worn surfaces. A stone flake removed from a core, a scratch across an ancient tooth, a pattern of damage on a tool, a hand shape left on a cave wall. Each can become a small clue. None of these clues allows us to enter the mind of a prehistoric person. We cannot say what that person believed about the left hand or the right hand. We cannot say whether a child was praised, corrected, or ignored for using one side more than the other. But we can sometimes observe the direction of action. That is enough to begin carefully. The human body leaves traces when it repeats movement. When a toolmaker strikes stone, the angle of force can affect the scar left behind. When a person holds material between the teeth and cuts it with a stone edge, accidental scratches can appear on the front teeth. When a hand is placed against rock and pigment is blown around it, the empty shape may preserve the outline of one hand, while the other hand does the work. Each kind of evidence is incomplete. Stone tools can be moved, broken, reused, or made in ways that do not clearly reveal the maker's preferred hand. Tooth marks can be difficult to interpret without comparison and experiment. Cave images may show ritual, play, memory, identity, or many things we cannot safely name. Yet together, these traces suggest that hand preference is not a modern invention. It reaches back into the older life of humans and close human relatives, into a time when survival depended on skilled movement more than written record. The important point is not that every ancient tool can be assigned to a right-handed or left-handed person. That would be too confident. The important point is that repeated patterns of action can sometimes be studied at the group level. Researchers have looked at tool production, tooth striations, and other traces to ask whether ancient populations showed the same broad tilt seen in people today. The answer appears cautious but meaningful. Right-sided preference seems very old, especially in later human and Neanderthal evidence, while left-sided individuals were still present. This is where the left-handed puzzle becomes anchored in the ground. It is not only a feature of modern desks, modern pens, or modern school rules. It belongs to the long relationship between hands, tools, mouths, bodies, and materials. Imagine an early human using the teeth as a clamp, holding a strip of hide or plant fiber while one hand guides a sharp stone. If the tool slips or cuts close to the mouth, the front teeth may receive small diagonal scratches. Over many individuals, the direction of such scratches can hint at which hand most often moved the tool. This does not tell us the full life of the person. It does not tell us whether they were kind, fearful, skilled, or old. It only tells us that a body acted in a certain direction often enough to leave a mark. That humility is essential. Prehistory is not a silent movie we can rewrite with certainty. It is a field of remains, and remains must be handled with restraint. Still, the remains matter. They show that the human hand was not merely attached to the body, it was part of a repeated system of making, cutting, holding, and learning. From the beginning of human action, bodies were already choosing sides in practice. Most seem to have chosen the right. Some did not. The minority was already there, quiet but visible, inside the traces of work. This is why archaeology gives the question a different weight. Left-handedness is not just a modern inconvenience surviving among keyboards and door handles. It is an old variation following the human hand through stone, tooth, wall, and time. The deeper we go into human prehistory, the more careful our language has to become. The past does not preserve whole lives, it preserves fragments. A broken edge, a polished surface, A scratch on enamel, a pattern on a wall, a bone with cut marks, a tool found beside another tool. These fragments are real, but they are not complete explanations. They tell us that something happened, not always why it happened. This is especially important when we speak about handedness. A mark may show the direction of a movement, but it cannot show a person's private intention. A tool may suggest how it was held, but it cannot tell us what the maker thought about the hand that held it. A left hand printed on a cave wall may mean that the right hand applied pigment, but it does not reveal whether the person was right-handed in every task. Archaeology can open a narrow window, but it cannot turn that window into a full room. This restraint is not a weakness. It is what makes the subject trustworthy. When we return to the origin of human action, we are not returning to a place where everything is visible. We are returning to a long, uneven record made by bodies interacting with matter. Stone survives better than skin. Teeth survive better than gestures. Walls survive better than voices. Because of that, the evidence for ancient handedness is indirect. Researchers often compare marks made by living people in controlled settings with marks found on ancient remains. If certain patterns are repeatedly produced by right-handed cutting or left-handed cutting today, similar patterns in older material may suggest a likely direction of movement, but likely does not mean certain in every case. A single mark can mislead. A single tool can have many possible histories. A person can use one hand for one task and another hand for a different task. The safest conclusions usually come from repeated patterns across many examples, not from one dramatic object. This is why the right-handed majority in the ancient record is best understood as a broad tendency, not a perfect rule. It appears in several kinds of evidence, but it still leaves room for exceptions, uncertainty, and local variation. That careful balance matters because it keeps the story from becoming too smooth. Human beings were never simple data points. They were living bodies in forests, grasslands, caves, coastlines, river valleys, and cold open places. They learned from others. They adapted to materials near them. They used teeth, hands, knees, stones, wood, fire, and memory together. A preference for one hand would have been part of that whole physical life. It may have shaped how a person cut meat, scraped hides, made a point, carried a child, gathered plants, or copied another person's movement, but it would not have existed alone. The hand was always inside a body, and the body was always inside a group. This is one reason we should avoid saying that prehistoric people valued one hand or feared another, unless there is clear cultural evidence for that claim. Later societies did attach meanings to left and right, sometimes strongly. But the deeper past does not give us permission to project those meanings backward without care. At the beginning of human history, before writing, before formal schools, before recorded rules about proper hands, there were only actions and the traces they sometimes left behind. Those traces suggest that asymmetry was already present. They suggest that most people may have favoured the right hand for certain skilled tasks. They also suggest that left-sided action never disappeared completely. That is the important link to the central question. If left-handedness were only a recent social problem, we might explain it through modern culture alone. But the archaeological hints point towards something older. They place the minority pattern near the roots of tool use, bodily coordination, and learned skill. The left hand appears not as a loud exception, but as a quiet possibility inside the same human system that made the right hand common. Archaeology cannot tell us everything. It cannot answer the whole puzzle, but it can keep us honest by showing where the ground is firm and where it is thin. It reminds us that the human past should be read slowly, mark by mark, without forcing the silence to say more than it can. The ancient record does not show a world divided evenly between left and right. It suggests a long tilt, a tendency, a repeated lean toward the right hand in many skilled actions, but a tendency is not a disappearance. That difference is the heart of the matter. A majority can become strong without becoming total. A pattern can guide a species without enclosing every individual inside it. When we look back toward early tool use, tooth scratches, hand images, and other traces of action, we seem to find a familiar shape. Most bodies appear to have moved in ways that fit right-handed preference, while a smaller number left signs of other arrangements. This is important because it places left-handedness deep inside the human story. It was not created by modern writing. It was not invented by schools. It was not produced only by tools designed badly for one side. Those things may have shaped how left-handed people were treated and how visible they became, but they did not create the biological possibility itself. That possibility was already present in the older body, the tool-making body, the body that learned by watching and repeating. From the beginning of human action, the hand was a way for the nervous system to enter the world. A person could think, remember, and intend, but the hand had to make contact with stone, wood, hide, food, and fire. If most people in a group used the right hand for delicate work, then many shared movements would become easier to copy. A child watching an elder strike stone could mirror the action within a familiar pattern. A tool passed from one person to another might fit the habits of the majority. A shared direction of movement could become part of how knowledge flowed through generations. This helps explain why the right-handed pattern could become so persistent. It was not only inside individual bodies, it could be reinforced by learning, by imitation, and by the ordinary convenience of doing things the way most people around you did them. Yet this reinforcement was not enough to erase the left-handed minority. That tells us something subtle about evolution. Strong patterns do not always eliminate weaker ones. Sometimes they create a landscape in which a minority remains small but stable. A left-handed person in an ancient group may have faced small mismatches when copying right-handed actions or sharing tools shaped by right-handed use. But those mismatches were not necessarily severe enough to prevent survival, skill, or reproduction. A left-handed child could still learn. A left-handed adult could still gather food, shape materials, care for others, and belong to a group. If the difference created difficulty, the difficulty could be managed. If it created occasional usefulness, that usefulness could help balance the cost. We should not imagine prehistoric left-handed people as isolated figures standing outside the group. There is no need for that picture, and no secure evidence for it. They were likely part of the same daily life as everyone else, using the same landscapes, facing the same hunger, weather, danger, and dependence on social bonds. Their handedness may have mattered most in the fine details of movement, the angle of a strike, the direction of a cut, the side from which a task felt natural. These details are small, but small details can survive for a very long time when they are rooted in development. This is why the ancient evidence deepens the puzzle rather than solving it. The right-handed majority appears old enough that left-handedness has had a long time to be pushed downward. If right-sided preference was already common among ancient humans and perhaps present in related human groups, then the left hand has existed under majority pressure for an immense stretch of human time. Still, it remained. It moved through generations without becoming dominant and without vanishing. It passed through worlds without writing, then through worlds with tools, customs, punishments, schools, and machines. The archaeological record cannot tell us every reason why, but it can show us that the question is not shallow. Left-handedness is not merely a modern inconvenience. It is an old human variation that endured beside one of the strongest behavioral patterns our species has ever carried. Human beings did not survive by strength alone. Much of our history depends on shared attention, copied movements, repeated tasks, and the slow transfer of skill from one body to another. A child watches an older person break a stone, tie a fibre, carry firewood, prepare food, or shape a tool. The child does not receive a written manual. The lesson is held in posture, timing, pressure, and direction. In such a world, the hand that leads is not a private detail. It affects how an action is seen, copied, corrected, and remembered. If most people in a group favour the right hand, then right-handed movement becomes the easier pattern to demonstrate. The learner sees the tool in a familiar position. The teacher's stronger hand moves in the direction most bodies around them expect. The object is passed back and forth in a way that fits the majority. This is one reason being different in handedness could create a cost in a cooperative species. The cost may not be dramatic. It may not decide life or death in a single moment, but it can appear in thousands of small adjustments. A left-handed child learning from a right-handed adult may need to reverse a movement internally. A left-handed worker using an object shaped by right-handed habits may need to turn it, grip it differently, or accept awkward pressure. A left-handed person standing beside others in shared labour may need more space on one side or may interrupt an expected rhythm. These frictions are quiet, but they are real enough to matter. Cooperation works best when bodies can predict one another. Human groups rely on that prediction constantly. When people carry something together, pass tools, prepare food, weave, scrape, cut, build, or later write and teach, the shared pattern reduces effort. The right-handed majority, therefore, becomes more than a statistic. It becomes an environment. It surrounds the left-handed person not as a law of nature, but as the accumulated habit of other bodies. This environment reaches back toward the beginning of human life because our ancestors had to learn complex skills long before formal instruction existed. Tool use is not just an invention of the hand, it is an inheritance of attention. Someone discovers or refines a method, others watch, children imitate, and the method travels forward. A strong majority preference could make this inheritance smoother. If most skilled actions are performed in the same direction, the group may waste less energy translating movements across sides. This does not mean left-handed people could not learn. They clearly can. It means their bodies sometimes had to negotiate a world where the common demonstration did not match their natural leading hand. In evolutionary terms, that kind of mismatch could count as a small disadvantage. But small disadvantages do not always remove a trait. A difference can persist if it does not seriously block survival or belonging. Left-handed people may have had to adapt, but adaptation is one of the most ordinary human abilities. They could watch carefully, mirror movements, change grip, or find their own efficient way through a task. The group itself may also have adapted around them, especially in close communities where every capable person mattered. A cooperative species does not only reward sameness, it also depends on flexibility. The same social life that makes majority patterns powerful can also absorb a certain amount of variation. This is why the left-handed minority is so interesting. It sits inside the tension between coordination and individuality. Too much difference can make shared work harder. Too much sameness can make a population rigid. Human beings live between those poles. The ancient body was not built for perfect standardization. It was built for workable coordination. A left-handed person might experience extra effort in copying the majority, but that effort did not make them outside the human story. They were still part of families, camps, migrations, work, memory, and care. Their hands still entered the same materials of life. Their movements still contributed to the same long beginning of human culture. The cost of being different was present, but it was not absolute. And because it was not absolute, the left hand could remain within the cooperative life of our species. Once a majority pattern becomes common enough, it begins to enter objects. It does not remain only in the body. It moves into handles, blades, grips, knots, weapons, writing surfaces, benches, doors, tools, and rituals. A right-handed world is not created all at once by a single decision. It grows slowly from repeated use. If most people cut with the right hand, tools may be shaped, sharpened, stored, and handed over in ways that fit right-handed motion. If most people throw, strike, carve, or scrape from the same side, shared workspaces begin to assume that side. Later, when societies become larger and more formal, the same assumption can enter schools, religious gestures, military training, craft traditions, and written systems. The left-handed person then faces not only the right-handed body of another individual, but a whole material world that has absorbed the majority habit. This is a deeper kind of pressure than simple inconvenience. It means that the environment itself can become slightly mismatched to one body. The tool may still work, but it may pull at the wrong angle. A blade may still cut, but the wrist may need to adjust. A desk may still hold paper, but the arm may cross the page. A line of writing may still be formed, but the hand may drag across fresh marks. These are not always serious barriers. Many left-handed people adapt with skill and patience. But the need to adapt is itself a sign that the world has chosen a side before the person begins. In the long origin of human life, tools were simpler than modern objects, but they were not neutral. A stone edge, a hafted point, a scraping tool, a digging stick, or a woven object can carry the memory of how it was made and how it was used. Some tools may be usable by either hand, with little difference. Others may become more comfortable in one direction because of wear, shaping, or habit. As technology grew more complex, this quiet bias could become stronger. A handmade object often reflects the maker's body. If most makers are right-handed, then the forms they repeat may suit right-handed use more naturally. When those forms are copied by students, traded across distance, or standardized by craft, the preference can travel beyond the original hand. Culture preserves movement in matter. This matters for the question of left-handedness, because it shows how a biological minority can meet pressure from outside the body. The left-handed child is not only born into a nervous system with its own pattern. The child is also born into a world of objects already shaped by other people's patterns. Later history makes this even clearer. In many writing traditions, the direction of script, the position of the writing hand, and the tools used for ink, chalk, stylus, or pen could make left-handed writing more difficult or more visible. In some societies, the right hand became associated with correctness, skill, purity, greeting, oath, or proper conduct, while the left hand could receive negative meanings. These meanings varied across cultures and periods, so we should not pretend there was one universal rule. But the general point is careful and strong. Human society has often turned the right hand into the expected hand. When expectation becomes social, the left hand can be treated not merely as different, but as something to be trained away. Yet even this pressure did not erase it. That is the striking thing. Objects can favor the right hand. Teachers can favor the right hand. Rituals can favor the right hand. Armies, workshops, kitchens, and writing desks can favor the right hand. Still, each generation continues to include people whose natural leading hand is the left. This does not mean culture has no power. Culture can hide left-handedness, reduce its public expression, and make some people appear right-handed on paper even when their body's older preference remains. But culture cannot easily reach back into every layer of development. It can change behavior more quickly than it can change the biological processes that produce variation. A person may learn to obey a right-handed rule while still feeling the left hand as the more natural bridge between intention and action. The pressure of right-handed tools and customs, therefore, sharpens the puzzle rather than solving it. If the world around the body kept leaning right, then the persistence of left-handedness becomes even more meaningful. It suggests that the left hand survived not because history was gentle to it, but because the forces that produced it were older, deeper, and not easily silenced by design. If left-handedness were only a burden, its persistence would be difficult to understand. A burden can remain for a while, especially if it is mild, but a strong burden repeated across countless generations usually leaves a mark. It becomes less common. It fades into smaller and smaller corners of the population. This is why the left-handed minority asks for a better explanation than simple disadvantage. The right-handed world may have created obstacles, but those obstacles were not enough to close the path completely. A left-handed person could still learn the group's skills, still adapt to tools, still join cooperative work, still teach children, still shape materials, still survive inside the same human story. The cost existed, but it did not remove the person from the flow of life. That difference matters. Evolution does not judge traits by comfort alone. It responds, slowly and imperfectly, to whether bodies can live, reproduce, and remain part of a social world. A trait may be awkward and still persist. A trait may create small problems and still endure if those problems are balanced, limited, or tied to deeper developmental systems that cannot be easily separated from the rest of the body. Left-handedness seems to belong to this quieter category. It is not best understood as a mistake that nature failed to correct. It is better seen as a variation that survived inside a species organized around both sameness and flexibility. The right-handed majority made many things smoother. Shared movement, teaching, tool use, and later writing could all become easier when most people leaned in the same direction. But human groups were never made of identical bodies. Every generation included differences in height, strength, memory, attention, voice, temperament, and skill. Some differences mattered greatly. Some mattered only in certain situations. Some became useful when the environment changed. A cooperative group could absorb variation as long as the variation did not break cooperation. The left-handed child may have had to adjust more often, but adjustment itself was common in human life. Everyone adjusted to weather, injury, hunger, age, terrain, and the habits of others. A different leading hand was one more negotiation between the body and the world. This brings us back to the deep beginning of human action. Our ancestors were not trying to create a perfect standard for the species. They were solving immediate problems with the bodies they had. They carried, cut, gathered, climbed, watched, copied, and made. In that long process, right-handedness appears to have become the common direction of skilled action. But common does not mean mandatory. The left-handed body could still find workable ways to perform the same tasks. It might reverse a movement, shift position, hold a tool differently, or learn through a mirror-like adjustment. The result may have been less convenient at times, but not impossible. Once that is understood, the mystery changes shape. The question is no longer why evolution allowed an impossible trait to survive. The question is why a possible but uncommon trait remained at a low and steady level, instead of disappearing or spreading everywhere. That kind of pattern often suggests balance. Something may keep the majority strong while something else prevents the minority from falling to nothing. The forces do not need to be dramatic. They can be small, repeated, and spread across many parts of life. A little cost in shared tools, a little flexibility in learning, a little developmental variation in the brain, a possible advantage in unusual movement, a social world that prefers sameness but still makes room for capable difference. Together, these forces can produce a minority that persists without becoming the rule. This is why the existence of left-handed people should not be treated as a broken fact. It is a sign of how human evolution often works, not by removing every irregularity, but by carrying forward forms that remain livable. The left hand did not need history to be kind. It only needed enough room to act, enough skill to adapt, and enough connection to remain inside the human chain of generations. A rare trait can sometimes survive because it is rare. This may sound strange at first, because we often think of evolution as favoring whatever is strongest, fastest, or most efficient. But living systems are not always shaped by simple rankings. And the value of a trait can depend on how common it is around the person who carries it. A movement that would lose its usefulness if everyone used it may remain useful when only a few people do. A behavior that creates trouble in ordinary cooperation may create surprise in a direct contest. A difference that feels awkward in a shared tool may become less predictable when another body has to respond to it quickly. This is the careful idea behind the hidden advantage of rarity. It does not say that left-handed people are better than right-handed people. It does not say that left-handedness is always helpful. It only suggests that a minority pattern can sometimes receive a small benefit, precisely because most other people are not prepared for it. To see why this matters, return to the older human world, where the body learned through watching, handling, and reacting. Most people in a group may have expected right-handed movements because those were the movements they saw most often. A tool passed from one person to another, a gesture of instruction, a thrown object, a strike, a block, a pull, or a sudden reach would usually come from the expected side. The brain becomes familiar with what it meets again and again. It learns the timing of ordinary movement. It prepares for the most common angle. If a smaller number of people moved from the opposite side, their actions could feel slightly less familiar to others. This does not require a dramatic scene. It does not require imagining prehistoric people as constant fighters. It simply follows from experience. Bodies predict the world by using the patterns they have practiced against. When the pattern changes, prediction becomes less smooth. In some situations, that small disturbance could matter. This is where a rare trait may avoid being pushed to zero. If left-handedness carried costs in a right-handed environment, but also carried occasional benefits because it was uncommon, the two forces could create a balance. When left-handed people are few, their movements remain unfamiliar enough to offer surprise in certain encounters. If left-handedness became very common, that surprise would fade. Others would grow used to it. The rare advantage would no longer be rare. In this way, the trait could remain present without spreading to the whole population. This kind of thinking is known in biology as frequency-dependent selection, though the basic idea is simple enough without the term. Sometimes the success of a trait depends on its frequency. The same trait can be useful at one level and less useful at another. For left-handedness, this does not prove a single cause. It offers one possible piece of a larger explanation. It helps us understand why the left hand might persist in a world where most objects, lessons, and habits leaned right. The minority could carry costs in daily coordination, while also carrying a small and changing advantage in situations where unusual movement mattered. Human evolution often works through such quiet trade-offs. It does not need one grand reason. It can hold a pattern in place through many small pressures, each incomplete by itself. The left hand may have remained because it was never simply a failure to match the majority. It was also a reminder that in a species built from prediction, cooperation, and response, the uncommon can sometimes have its own fragile value. In direct encounters, the body often reacts before thought has time to arrange a clear explanation. A person sees a shoulder turn, a hand rise, a step shift, and the nervous system begins to predict what may happen next. This prediction is built from experience. If most people someone has faced, watched, played with, worked beside, or struggled against have moved with the right hand leading, then right-handed movement becomes the familiar pattern. The angle of approach feels known. The timing feels ordinary. The likely side of contact is easier to read. A left-handed movement can disturb that expectation, not because it is stronger by nature, but because it comes from a less practiced direction. This is the small and careful meaning of advantage here. It is not a claim that left-handed people are naturally better in conflict. It is only the idea that an uncommon pattern can be harder to anticipate when most bodies have spent their lives adjusting to the common one. This idea is easier to see in modern sports, where left-handed or left-footed athletes can sometimes create unfamiliar angles for opponents who mostly train against right-sided movement. But the basic principle does not belong only to sport. It belongs to bodies learning other bodies. Long before organized games, written rules, or measured contests, human beings had to read movement. They had to notice who was reaching, who was blocking, who was pulling, who was throwing, who was approaching too quickly, and who was using a tool in a dangerous way. Human life was cooperative, but it was not free of tension. There were disputes, competition, defense, play, hunting accidents, and close physical work where quick response mattered. In such moments, the side from which a movement came could change the ease of reaction. A right-handed person facing another right-handed person meets a pattern the body has likely known many times. A right-handed person facing a left-handed person may meet a mirror pattern that is less familiar. The difference does not need to be large. Evolution can act on small differences when they repeat over many generations. Still, this possibility must be held gently. It would be misleading to imagine that left-handedness survived only because of fighting. Human origins cannot be reduced to combat. The same hands that might strike also carried children, gathered food, cleaned skins, shared objects, shaped tools, touched faces, made gestures, and helped the injured. The human hand is not a weapon first. It is a bridge between the inner life of the body and the outer world. For most of human history, that bridge was used for survival through cooperation more often than through direct violence. So the rarity advantage, if it mattered, was probably only one small weight on the scale. The more useful thought is balance. In ordinary shared tasks, being left-handed in a right-handed group may create small inconveniences. In direct physical interaction, being left-handed may sometimes create a small unpredictability. Neither force has to dominate completely. Together, they may help explain why left-handedness stays low but does not fall away. If too many people were left-handed, others would become used to left-sided movement, and the advantage of surprise would weaken. If very few were left-handed, the developmental processes that produce variation could still bring some back into each generation. This creates a quiet pattern, rare enough to remain unusual, but not so harmful that it disappears. The left hand, then, may have survived partly because human beings are creatures of expectation. We learn the world by repetition. We learn other bodies by watching them move. When a minority body moves differently, the difference can carry a cost in one setting and a small edge in another. This does not make the minority magical. It makes it possible. And in evolution, possibility repeated long enough can be enough to keep a trait alive. The safest way to understand the left hand is not as a secret advantage, but as a small variation with trade-offs. It may create inconvenience in one setting and a slight benefit in another. It may make some learned movements harder to copy, while making some direct responses harder for others to predict. It may be shaped by biology before culture notices it, and then shaped again by culture after birth. No single explanation needs to carry the whole weight. The search for one perfect answer can make the question less accurate. Human evolution rarely works like a simple story where one trait survives because of one clear reward. It works through many pressures, each changing with environment, group, body, and time. Left-handedness may have remained because its costs were real but limited, and its benefits were possible but not large enough to make it common. This is a quiet kind of balance. It does not create a hero, it creates a minority that persists. When we return to the older human world, that balance becomes easier to imagine. A left-handed person in a mostly right-handed group may have had to learn movements from the opposite side. They may have adjusted grip, position, and angle more often than others. In shared work, they may have met small frictions when standing beside another person, using a worn tool or copying a skilled motion. These frictions would matter, but they would not necessarily ruin a life. The same person could still become skilled. The same body could still learn by repetition. The same hands could still gather food, prepare material, carry children, make tools, and join the long human chain of teaching and care. If left-handedness had been deeply damaging, we would expect stronger pressure against it. But if it was only sometimes inconvenient, evolution might leave it alone, especially if other forces kept producing it. At the same time, rare movement could have value. In moments of fast reaction, a left-handed action might come from a less familiar side. In games, contests, defense, or struggle, that unfamiliarity might disturb prediction. The word slightly is important. A small edge is not a destiny. It does not mean left-handed people were born for conflict, or that the left hand carried a fixed superiority. It only means that rarity can change how other bodies respond. Most people become fluent at reading the movements they see most often. When a movement comes from the less common side, the reading may be slower or less certain. Across many lives, small differences can help a trait remain present, especially when the trait also arises from ordinary variation in development. This helps protect the explanation from becoming too dramatic. The left hand did not need to defeat the right hand. It only needed to survive beside it. It did not need to become the best solution for human life. It only needed to remain a workable solution. That may be why the minority pattern feels so stable. If left-handedness became too common, others would learn to expect it, and any advantage of rarity would shrink. If it became too rare, the developmental pathways that create variation could still bring it back. Between those limits, the trait could hover at a low level for a long time. The exact number may change with culture and measurement, but the shape of the pattern remains meaningful. Most humans lean right. Some lean left. The left side stays uncommon enough to be noticed, yet common enough to belong to the species. This is not a flaw in the human design. It is a sign that the design was never a single design at all. The human body carries history through variation. It keeps what can live, adapt, and continue. Left-handedness survived not by proving that difference is always better, but by showing that difference does not have to be better to endure. One possible clue to the survival of left-handedness comes from a difficult part of human life: direct conflict. This idea must be handled with care, because human beings were never only fighters. The same hands that could strike also made tools, gathered food, carried children, prepared shelter, touched the injured, and shared objects across a firelit space. To reduce the human past to violence would be false. Yet it would also be false to pretend that conflict had no place in our history. Humans have always lived in groups, and group life can produce cooperation, but also rivalry, defense, anger, competition, and danger. In moments when bodies meet bodies quickly, the direction of movement can matter. A hand that comes from the less expected side may create a brief uncertainty. That uncertainty may be small, but small things can matter when reaction is measured not in long thought, but in the body's first response. Most people learn movement by meeting the common pattern again and again. A right-handed person grows up seeing right-handed reaches, right-handed throws, right-handed strikes, right-handed tool use, and right-handed gestures. The eyes and nervous system become trained by repetition. They do not need words to form expectation. The body remembers angles. It remembers the side from which movement usually begins. If a left-handed person moves from the opposite side, the movement may arrive with a slightly different geometry. The shoulder turns differently. The arm crosses space differently. The point of contact may come from a less practiced angle. In a direct encounter, this can make the left-handed person harder to read for someone used mainly to right-handed bodies. This does not make the left hand stronger. It does not make the left-handed person more aggressive. It only means that rarity can disturb prediction. Modern examples can help us understand the principle, though they should not be pushed too far into the past. In some interactive sports, left-sided players can be awkward opponents because most players train more often against right-sided movement. The advantage is not mysterious. It comes from familiarity and unfamiliarity. The common movement is easier to anticipate because it has been seen more often. The uncommon movement asks the opponent to adjust. Ancient human life did not have modern sports in the same sense, and we should not pretend that it did. But the body's problem of prediction is old. A person facing another body still had to judge direction, speed, and intention from posture and motion. Whether in rough play, sudden defense, close struggle, or competition over resources, unusual handedness could sometimes change the timing of response. This possible advantage also explains why left-handedness would not need to become common to survive. In fact, if the advantage depends on being unusual, it weakens as the trait becomes more common. If many people were left-handed, others would gain more practice responding to left-handed movement. The surprise would fade. The minority would lose part of what made it difficult to predict. This creates a quiet balance. Left-handedness may carry costs in shared right-handed environments, while carrying occasional benefits in direct interactions because it remains rare. Neither force has to be large. Neither force has to explain everything. Together, they can help keep a trait from disappearing without allowing it to take over. The deeper lesson is that evolution does not always reward one clean winner. It can preserve a pattern because different pressures pull in different directions. The right-handed majority may have been favored by shared learning, tool habits, and easier coordination. The left-handed minority may have been maintained by developmental variation and, in some situations, the small advantage of unfamiliar movement. This returns us to the beginning of human action, where survival depended on bodies that could cooperate, predict, respond, and adapt. The left hand remained inside that world not as a contradiction to human nature, but as one of the ways human nature stayed variable. Conflict can help explain a small part of left-handedness, but it cannot carry the whole story. Human beings did not become human by fighting alone. Our deeper history is filled with quieter actions that happened far more often than direct violence. Gathering food, preparing plants, breaking bones, scraping hides, making shelters, carrying infants, sharing tools, tending fire, watching elders, and learning the small movements that kept a group alive. The hand that could surprise an opponent was also the hand that had to work all day, inside ordinary life. If left-handedness survived, it had to survive not only in moments of danger, but in the long, repeated tasks of existence. This is why the explanation must widen. A left-handed person in an ancient group did not spend life as an unusual fighter. They lived inside the same web of hunger, weather, care, skill, injury, memory, and dependence as everyone else. Their body had to solve daily problems in a mostly right-handed social environment. A tool might be passed to them in a certain orientation. A demonstration might need to be mentally reversed. A shared task might place them on the less convenient side of another worker. But these mismatches were not the whole of life. Many tasks could be adapted. A stone edge can be turned. A grip can be changed. A body can shift position. A child can learn a movement by watching carefully, then finding the version that fits their own hand. In this way, human cooperation could absorb difference. The left-handed person was not outside the group's knowledge. They were part of its adjustment. This matters because the origin of human success lies in flexible coordination. We often imagine tool use as a single hand striking a single object, but most human work depends on the whole body and often on more than one person. One hand holds while the other cuts. One person steadies while another pulls. One adult demonstrates while a child tries. One group member gathers material while another prepares it. In such a world, perfect sameness is helpful but not necessary. What matters more is whether people can keep working together. A different leading hand may create small moments of awkwardness, yet the group can still function if the person is skilled, patient, observant, and included. The same hand that is uncommon can still become useful through practice. It can learn the pressure of scraping, the rhythm of grinding, the angle of throwing, the tenderness of carrying, and the precision of shaping. This is why left-handedness should not be explained as if it existed only at the edge of combat. The human hand is too rich for that. It belongs to labor, food, care, craft, memory, and social teaching. If unusual movement gave left-handed people a small advantage in direct encounters, that advantage would have been only one thread in a much larger fabric. Other threads may have been developmental. Some children simply grow into left-handedness because of how their nervous system organizes movement. Other threads may have been social. A group that values each person's skill can tolerate difference more easily than a system that demands strict uniformity. Other threads may have been practical. Many early tools were simple enough to be used from either side with adjustment. The balance becomes clearer when we avoid a single cause story. Right-handedness may have been favored because it made imitation and shared work smoother. Left-handedness may have persisted because its costs were not severe, because development kept producing it, because some rare movements carried occasional advantages, and because human groups were flexible enough to include bodies that did not match the majority. This is not a dramatic answer, but it is a more faithful one. Evolution often preserves what is workable, not what is perfect. The left hand remained because daily life was difficult, but not closed, demanding but not completely standardized, shaped by the majority, but still open enough for another pattern to continue. Left-handedness becomes easier to understand when it is treated not as the result of one pressure, but as the meeting place of many small pressures. A single cause would be too neat for a trait that reaches into the brain, the body, the group, the tool, and the long habits of culture. If the question is why the left hand did not disappear, the answer may lie in the fact that no single force was strong enough to erase it, and no single benefit was strong enough to make it common. Instead, the trait remained between those forces, held in a quiet balance. On one side, there was the convenience of the majority. Right-handedness made shared action easier when most people already moved that way. A child learning from a right-handed adult could copy without reversing the motion. A tool made by a right-handed craftsperson might feel natural in the hand of another right-handed person. A group working side by side could predict the direction of movement more easily when most bodies followed the same pattern. Over many generations, these ordinary advantages could help keep right-handedness dominant. But dominance is not the same as total control. Human life is full of dominant patterns that still leave space for variation. Most people may follow one bodily tendency, while a smaller number follow another and still live successfully. On the other side, left-handedness may have carried occasional benefits because it was uncommon. In direct encounters, unusual movement can be harder to read. In tasks that require flexible problem-solving, a body accustomed to adapting may find alternate ways to handle tools and space. In social life, a group may not need every person to move exactly the same way, as long as cooperation remains possible. These possible benefits should not be inflated. They are not proof of superiority. They are only reminders that a trait can survive through small, uneven advantages that appear in certain settings and vanish in others. Between cost and benefit sits development itself. This may be the deepest reason left-handedness is so difficult to remove from the human story. A child's handedness does not appear as a simple decision made by culture. It grows from the nervous system as the body learns to reach, grasp, balance, and repeat movement. Genetics seems to play a role, but not in a simple one gene, one hand way. Early development, timing, family tendency, and biological variation all appear to matter. Because the systems involved are broad and connected to how the brain organizes action, left-handedness may continue to arise even in societies that discourage it. Culture can train behavior, but it cannot fully rewrite every pathway by which the body becomes itself. This is why left-handedness can be hidden without being eliminated. A person can be taught to write with the right hand and still feel the left hand as the more natural hand for other actions. A society can count fewer left-handed people because fewer are allowed to show it, while the underlying variation remains. The human past likely carried many such hidden differences. Some were visible in tool marks or movement. Some left no trace at all. Returning to the beginning of human action, the picture becomes less like a battle between left and right, and more like a landscape of workable possibilities. The right hand became the main road, worn smooth by repeated use, teaching, imitation, and shared tools. The left hand became a narrower path, less travelled but still open. It may have been harder in some places, easier in others, and occasionally useful precisely because fewer people expected it. Evolution did not need to choose one path absolutely. It only needed bodies to keep living, learning, and passing forward their patterns. The left-handed minority remained because it was not a fatal deviation from human life. It was a recurring form of human life. Its persistence shows that our species was never shaped into perfect uniformity. We became coordinated enough to share skills, but variable enough to keep producing different bodies. That balance, quiet and unfinished, is what allowed the left hand to move through history beside the right. The question of genes is tempting because it promises a clean answer. If left-handedness runs in families, then perhaps there is a simple inherited switch, one version for the right hand and one version for the left. But human biology is rarely so tidy. Handedness does show some connection with inheritance. Left-handed parents are more likely on average to have left-handed children than right-handed parents are, yet the prediction is far from exact. A right-handed couple can have a left-handed child. A left-handed parent can have right-handed children. Two siblings can settle into different preferences. Even twins, who may share much of their genetic background, do not always share the same handedness. This tells us that genes are involved, but they do not command the hand with a single, simple order. They are part of a wider developmental process. A useful way to imagine this is not as a blueprint with one line marked left or right, but as a landscape of tendencies. Genes may influence how the brain and body grow, how asymmetry develops, how movement becomes coordinated, and how likely one side is to become dominant. But those influences work through development, not around it. A child's nervous system forms step by step, through timing, chemical signals, growth, early movement, and interaction with the world. By the time a child clearly reaches, grasps, points, draws, throws, or feeds themselves with a preferred hand, many quieter layers have already been unfolding. The hand that leads is the visible outcome of processes that began before the child could name either hand. This is important for the central puzzle because it means left-handedness is not simply a choice and not simply a cultural accident. It grows from the same biological systems that make right-handedness possible. Most of those systems lean toward right-handedness in most people, but not with perfect force. Some children develop another pattern. Some remain more mixed. Some may be pushed by schooling or habit to use the right hand for public tasks, while the left hand remains more natural in private or in quick movement. The inherited side of handedness, therefore, behaves more like a probability than a command. It changes the chance of an outcome, but it does not guarantee the outcome. This helps explain why left-handedness can keep returning generation after generation. If it were caused by one harmful gene with no balancing value, we might expect stronger pressure against it over time. If it were caused by culture alone, it should change more quickly when culture changes. Instead, it seems to sit between inheritance, development, and experience. That middle position makes it durable. Culture can discourage the left hand, but it cannot easily stop the biological variation that produces left-handed children. Genes can influence the pattern, but they do not reduce every child to a predictable result. Development adds its own small variations, and those variations become part of the living body. This brings us back to the older human beginning, before writing and formal rules. Our ancestors did not need to understand genes for inheritance to shape them. They only needed bodies that grew, learned, moved, and passed life forward. Some of those bodies became strongly right-handed, a smaller number became left-handed. The pattern was not perfect, but perfection was never required. Human evolution works through probabilities spread across countless births. In that slow process, left-handedness remained because the systems that produce handedness are not narrow enough to close every alternate path. The left hand is not a separate invention. It is one possible result of the same unfinished biological process that gives the human body a leading side at all. Before a child can write, throw, or choose a tool, the body has already begun to organize movement. This begins long before school, before correction, and even before birth. In the womb, The nervous system is forming connections, muscles are beginning to move, and the body is slowly learning its own patterns of motion. Some studies have observed early differences in fetal movement, such as preferences in sucking a thumb or turning in a certain way, though these early signs should not be treated as perfect predictions of later handedness. They are hints, not final answers. Still, they remind us that handedness does not suddenly appear when a child picks up a pencil. It grows out of a much older process, one that starts while the brain, spine, arms and senses are still developing together. This matters because the human body is not built by genes alone, and it is not shaped by culture alone. It emerges from both, with timing and chance woven through them. Genes may influence how the left and right sides of the nervous system develop, but development is not a straight road. Cells grow, signals move, tissues respond, and small differences can become part of a larger pattern. The body has to organize two sides that are similar in appearance but not identical in function. It has to create pathways that allow one hand to reach, grip, and refine movement with increasing confidence. For most children, this process eventually leans toward the right hand. For some, it leans toward the left. For others, it remains more flexible across different tasks. None of this requires a single clear cause. A left-handed child does not need to have been forced into left-handedness by one event, nor chosen it as a preference like choosing a color. The preference settles slowly as the growing brain and body interact with the world. After birth, early experience continues the shaping. A baby reaches, misses, tries again, touches surfaces, grasps fingers, brings objects toward the mouth, and begins to discover how movement feels. Caregivers may place objects in one hand or another. Toys may be offered from different sides. A child may sleep, crawl, sit, and turn in ways that slightly favor certain movements. These details do not control handedness with certainty, but they become part of the environment in which the nervous system practices. The origin of human action is always like this, body and world meeting again and again until a pattern becomes familiar. Our ancestors learned in the same broad way, through reaching, holding, copying, and repeating, long before anyone could explain handedness as biology. This is why left-handedness can survive pressure from a right-handed world. Culture may encourage one hand after birth, but it meets a body that has already begun forming its own organization. If the left hand has become the easier bridge between intention and action, correction may change visible behavior without fully changing inner comfort. A child can be trained to use the right hand for writing, yet still reach naturally with the left, throw with the left, or feel steadier using the left for delicate work. The deeper pattern may bend, but not always vanish. This does not mean handedness is fixed in a rigid way from the womb. It means development has depth. The final pattern comes from many layers: inherited tendency, early growth, nervous system asymmetry, movement before birth, practice after birth, family environment, cultural pressure, and ordinary biological variation. This layered process helps explain why left-handedness keeps appearing without becoming the majority. The human body is stable enough to produce a strong right-handed pattern in most people, yet open enough to produce other outcomes. Left-handedness remains because development itself leaves room for more than one path. Across generations, that room has been enough for the left hand to return, quietly, as one ancient variation of human movement again and again, slowly. The layered nature of handedness helps explain why the left hand can remain present without spreading through the whole species. If handedness were controlled by one simple switch, the pattern might be easier to change over time. A strongly harmful version could be reduced. A strongly helpful version could become common. But handedness does not seem to behave like that. It appears to arise from many influences, each contributing only part of the result. Genes can tilt the probability. Early development can shape the nervous system. Movement before birth may reveal early tendencies. Practice after birth can strengthen one side. Culture can encourage or discourage visible behavior. Chance can enter through the timing of growth itself. When a trait emerges from so many layers, it becomes difficult for evolution or culture to erase it completely. To remove left-handedness entirely, the human body would have to close many small doors at once. It would need to prevent certain patterns of brain organization, certain early movement tendencies, certain family probabilities, and certain developmental variations. But those same systems are not isolated from the rest of human life. They are tied to movement, perception, coordination, language, tool use, and skilled action. Evolution cannot simply remove one outcome without touching the wider machinery that produces all outcomes. This is why the left hand may continue to appear even in societies that strongly prefer the right. The preference of a culture can be powerful, but it arrives after the body has already begun its quiet construction. A child can be corrected at a desk, but the child's nervous system has already spent years learning how reaching, grasping, and balance feel. The visible hand can be trained, but the deeper comfort of movement may remain. This also helps explain why left-handedness does not become the majority. The same developmental system that leaves room for left-handedness still seems to lean strongly toward right-handedness for most people. Human populations are not split evenly because the biological and social forces are not evenly balanced. Brain organization, inherited tendencies, imitation, and the right-handed environment all help keep the right hand common. The left hand returns because development is open. The right hand remains dominant because development is not open in every direction equally. That middle state is the key. Left-handedness is neither a disappearing error nor a rising replacement. It is a recurring minority outcome within a species that has a strong majority pattern. This returns us to the origin of human action. Our ancestors needed hands that could become skilled, not hands that followed a perfect rule. A body that settled into right-handed precision could make tools, prepare food, and copy others. A body that settled into left-handed precision could also do these things, though sometimes through different angles and adjustments. Both paths could be workable. But because most bodies leaned right, the social world reinforced the right. Because development remained variable, the left did not vanish. This is not a contradiction once we stop expecting evolution to produce uniformity. Evolution often preserves ranges, tendencies, and probabilities. A species can have a common pattern without making every individual match it. The human body is built from repeating instructions, but each life unfolds in a slightly different environment of growth. Even within one family, children can carry different rhythms of movement. Even within one person, the hands can divide tasks in complex ways. Writing may go to one side, throwing to another, holding and guiding to both. Such complexity makes handedness difficult to reduce to one cause. It also makes it durable. The left hand survives because the systems that produce human movement are flexible enough to create it, and the world is survivable enough for it to remain. It does not need to be chosen by every generation. It only needs to keep appearing in some children, and for those children to find enough space to live, learn, work, and pass the human story forward. Across history, the left hand was not only a biological difference. In many societies, it became a cultural sign. The right hand could be linked with skill, correctness, honor, greeting, oath, purity, or proper behavior, while the left hand could be linked with clumsiness, impurity, weakness, suspicion, or bad fortune. These meanings were not identical everywhere, and they did not appear in the same way in every period. Human cultures are too varied for one simple rule. But the broad pattern is strong enough to notice. Many communities gave the right side a more favorable meaning and treated the left side as something less trusted, less clean, or less proper. This added another layer of pressure on left-handed people. Their difference was no longer only about how a tool felt in the hand. It could become part of how others judged the body itself. That judgment may seem strange from a modern point of view, but it grew from ordinary social habits repeated over time. If most people used the right hand for greeting, eating, signing, blessing, swearing an oath, or performing public gestures, then the right hand became associated with the visible order of the group. The left hand, used less often in those formal moments, could become the other side, the less honored side, the side that did not match public expectation. Once a physical majority becomes a symbol, the minority faces something more difficult than inconvenience. It faces meaning. A child who naturally reaches with the left hand may not only be told that the movement is awkward, they may be told that it is wrong, rude, dirty, or improper. The hand becomes a moral problem, even when the body has done nothing harmful. This is one of the quieter costs of being different in a species that depends so deeply on shared rules. At the beginning of human life, long before written records, the hand was a practical instrument. It held, cut, carried, and shaped. Later, as societies grew more symbolic, the hand also became a sign. It could show trust, status, respect, obedience, faith, agreement, or refusal. The more symbolic the hand became, the more strongly cultures could decide which hand belonged in public space. This did not change the biology of handedness overnight, but it changed the experience of left-handedness. A person could feel the left hand as natural and still learn that the world preferred to see the right. In some historical settings, left-handed children were corrected with pressure, shame, punishment, or repeated training. They were encouraged, or forced, to write with the right hand, eat with the right hand, offer the right hand, or keep the left hand hidden during formal acts. This was not because their left hand could not function. It was because the culture around them had already decided what proper movement of fate looked like. Such correction could make left-handedness less visible in public records. A person counted as right-handed in writing might still be left-handed in reaching, throwing, working, or instinctive action. The body may learn to obey one rule while keeping another pattern beneath it. This matters for the central question because culture did not simply ignore left-handedness. At times, culture actively tried to reduce it. If left-handedness were a shallow habit, this pressure might have removed it more completely, yet it remained. Children continued to develop left-hand preference even when teachers, parents, rituals, and tools preferred the right. This tells us that the source of the pattern is older than social approval. Culture could make the left hand harder to show, but it could not stop the human body from producing left-handed people. The history of correction therefore deepens the paradox. The left hand survived not in a neutral world, but in a world that often asked it to become quiet. It passed through rules, symbols, shame, training, and misunderstanding. Still, it kept returning generation after generation, as if the body remembered a possibility that culture could cover but not fully erase. The pressure against the left hand became especially visible when societies began to organize learning and labor more formally. A child in a small group can sometimes adapt quietly, finding the grip, angle, and posture that fit the body. But a child in a classroom faces a different kind of world. The desk may be built for the right arm. The teacher may demonstrate with the right hand. The writing system may move across the page in a direction that makes the left hand drag over fresh marks. The tools may be shared, standardized, and designed for the majority. Under those conditions, left-handedness becomes more noticeable, and what becomes noticeable can become corrected. Many left-handed children in past generations were pushed toward right-handed writing, not because their left hand could not learn, but because the school expected one visible form of order. The hand had to fit the room, the paper, the lesson, and the idea of what a proper student looked like. This is a powerful example of how culture can press against biology. The child's nervous system may have settled naturally toward the left hand, yet the institution may have demanded the right. The result was often not a simple transformation from left-handed to right-handed. It could be a divided life of the hands. The right hand might write in public because it had been trained to do so. The left hand might still reach first, throw more naturally, guide a tool more comfortably, or feel more precise in private movement. From outside, the person could appear corrected. From inside, the body might remain quietly organized around the other side. This makes the history of left-handedness difficult to measure. If we count only the hand used for writing, we may mistake social pressure for biological change. If a culture punishes left-handed writing, then fewer people will report left-handed writing, but that does not mean fewer left-handed bodies were born. The left hand can disappear from the page while remaining in the body. Labor created another kind of pressure. In workshops, fields, kitchens, ships, factories, and military training, tools are often made around the common user. A right-handed blade, a right-handed workstation, a right-handed weapon drill, or a right-handed sequence of movement can be efficient for most people and awkward for some. The more standardized the system becomes, the less room there may be for personal adjustment. A single craftsperson can turn a tool or change position. A worker in a line, a soldier in formation, or a student in rows may have less freedom. The right hand then becomes part of discipline. It is not only the common hand, it is the hand that keeps bodies synchronized. This touches the deep origin of human cooperation. Our ancestors survived by learning from one another, but early learning was often close, flexible, and physical. Later, institutions made learning larger and more uniform. Uniformity can spread knowledge efficiently, but it can also make minority bodies pay the cost of fitting in. Left-handed people carried that cost in small physical adjustments and sometimes in shame. They had to learn not only the task, but the right-handed form of the task. A hand that naturally moved one way was asked to move another way for the sake of order. Yet even repeated correction did not remove left-handedness from humanity. It changed appearances. It shaped habits. It may have made many left-handed people look right-handed in public records, but it did not reach fully into the developmental sources that give a child a leading hand. This is why the left hand remained so persistent. Schools could train the hand, tools could demand adaptation, rituals could define propriety, labor systems could reward standard movement. But beneath all of that, new children continued to arrive with bodies that did not always follow the majority path. Culture could cover the difference, but the difference kept returning. A culture can change what a person shows, but it does not always change what the body feels. This is one reason the history of left-handed correction is so revealing. In many places, people learn to hide the left hand, discipline it, or reserve it for private tasks. A child could be taught to write with the right hand, greet with the right hand, eat with the right hand, and present the right hand in public. From outside, the correction might seem complete. The page shows right-handed writing. The ritual shows the expected gesture. The classroom sees obedience. But beneath those visible acts, the older organization of movement may remain. The left hand may still reach first when there is no time to think. It may still feel steadier when holding a small object. It may still guide the body in sudden action, in play, in work, or in moments when no one is watching. This difference between public behavior and inner comfort helps explain why left-handedness could survive centuries of pressure. Social rules can be strong, but they often operate on expression. Biology operates earlier, in development, before the child understands the rule. By the time a teacher corrects the hand, the nervous system has already spent years learning which side feels more natural for reaching, grasping, balancing, and predicting movement. Correction can add a new layer of training, but it may not erase the earlier layer. The result can be a person who uses the right hand for some learned tasks and the left hand for others, not because the body is confused, but because life has written two histories into the same body. This brings the question back to the beginning of human action. The first human hands did not move under school rules. They moved because bodies needed food, shelter, care, tools, and contact. They learned through repetition before they learned through instruction. A preferred hand was not first a label. It was a rhythm of survival. Later culture could judge that rhythm, but judgment came after the body had already begun. This is why cultural suppression did not remove left-handedness. It could make the left hand less visible in writing. It could make older generations less willing to identify as left-handed. It could make official numbers lower in societies where correction was common. But it could not stop each new generation from producing children whose movements settled leftward. The persistence of left-handedness, therefore, shows a boundary between culture and biology. Culture can shape behavior powerfully. It can decide which hand is polite, which hand is taught, which hand is punished, which hand is allowed on the page. But culture cannot easily command the whole developmental process that builds a nervous system. That process is older than any classroom and deeper than any custom. It belongs to the way the human body becomes organized for action. This does not mean the pressure was harmless. Many left-handed people experienced difficulty, shame, frustration, or unnecessary struggle because their natural hand was treated as a problem. That part of the story should not be softened too much. A world designed for the right hand can make the left-handed person spend extra effort simply to do ordinary things. But the fact that left-handedness survived such pressure is also important. It tells us that this variation was not a fragile surface habit. It was rooted enough to keep returning even when society tried to cover it. The left hand passed through correction like a quiet river under stone, sometimes hidden, sometimes redirected, sometimes forced into another channel but not gone. And in that survival, it reveals something about human nature. Our species can build strong rules around the majority, yet the body continues to produce differences that no rule fully contains. The modern world did not create left-handedness, but it helped reveal it. For a long time, many left-handed people were not counted as left-handed in any clear way. They may have written with the right hand because they were trained to do so. They may have avoided using the left hand in public because it attracted correction or embarrassment. They may have grown up in homes, schools, or workplaces where the right hand was treated as the only proper hand for visible tasks. In such conditions, the number of left-handed people seen by society could be smaller than the number of left-handed bodies actually present. The difference between being left-handed and being allowed to appear left-handed is important. When social pressure begins to weaken, the same biological variation can become more visible without any sudden change in human evolution. A generation does not need to mutate for more left-handed people to be reported. It may only need to stop hiding them. This is one of the clearest lessons of modern handedness. As correction became less accepted in many places, and as schools became more tolerant of children writing with the hand that felt natural, left-handedness could step into view more openly. The rise in visible left-handedness across some modern records should therefore be understood carefully. It may reflect greater acceptance, better measurement, and changing definitions as much as any biological shift. The body was there before the survey learned how to see it. This matters because the central question is not only biological, it is also historical. The persistence of left-handedness has always passed through the way societies notice, name, and measure difference. In the deeper human past, we look for marks on stone, teeth, tools, and walls. In the modern world, we look at questionnaires, school records, sports statistics, medical forms, and everyday self-reporting. Each kind of evidence has its own limits. A person asked, "Which hand do you write with?" may answer one thing. Asked, "Which hand do you throw with?" they may answer another. Asked, "Which hand feels natural?" they may hesitate, because life may have trained both hands differently. The modern world reveals more than the past, but it does not reveal everything perfectly. It still depends on the question being asked. It still depends on whether the person feels free to answer honestly. It still depends on whether handedness is treated as writing, skill, preference, or identity. These differences help explain why numbers vary between studies and populations. The familiar estimate near 1/10 is useful, but it should not be read like a fixed law. It is a broad sign of a recurring minority, seen more clearly when social pressure does not force the minority into disguise. The modern left-handed person also lives in a world that is both easier and still quietly uneven. Many tools are now available in left-handed versions. Many teachers no longer try to switch a child's writing hand. Public attitudes in many places have softened. A left-handed child today may face less shame than a left-handed child in the past. Yet the right-handed environment remains. Door handles, scissors, desks, instruments, machines, kitchen tools, handwriting habits, and training methods still often assume the right hand first. The difference is that the mismatch is more likely to be recognized as design, not defect. That shift is profound. It moves the problem away from the person and toward the arrangement of the world around them. This connects back to the origin of human action in a quiet way. The first tools were shaped by bodies. Later tools shaped bodies in return. For thousands of years, majority use entered objects, and objects reinforced majority use. The modern world begins to notice that loop. It can ask whether a tool feels awkward because the hand is wrong, or because the tool was made with only one kind of user in mind. That question changes the meaning of left-handedness. It no longer appears only as a deviation from the common pattern. It becomes evidence that human design has often mistaken the majority for the whole species. When pressure decreases, the left hand does not suddenly become new, it becomes visible. And once visible, it shows us that the human population has carried more variation all along than some records were willing to admit. Modern statistics can make left-handedness look cleaner than it really is. A number appears on a page, and it feels solid. But behind that number are people of different ages, different cultures, different school histories, and different definitions of what it means to prefer one hand. A young person who was never forced to change may answer easily that they are left-handed. An older person who is trained to write with the right hand may answer right-handed even if the left hand still feels more natural for many tasks. A person who writes with the right but throws with the left may not know which category fits. Someone who uses the left hand for delicate work and the right hand for strength may not fit a simple box at all. This is why modern differences in left-handedness are not only biological differences, they also reflect how a society asks the question, how safe the answer feels, and which action is treated as the true sign of handedness. Age is especially important. In places where older generations were more likely to be corrected, fewer older adults may identify openly as left-handed. This does not always mean left-handedness was biologically rarer when they were born. It may mean their visible behavior was shaped by stronger social pressure. Younger generations may report left-handedness more often because they were allowed to keep the hand that felt natural. When we compare age groups, we are therefore not only comparing bodies, we are comparing histories of permission. Culture enters the number quietly. It enters through teachers, parents, writing lessons, table manners, religious habits, craft traditions, and the fear of standing out. A survey may look modern, but the answer can carry a childhood from decades earlier. Measurement also changes the picture. If researchers ask only about writing, they may miss people whose writing hand was trained, but whose natural action remains left-sided in other tasks. If they ask about many activities, the picture becomes more complex. Some people are strongly left-handed across nearly all tasks. Some are strongly right-handed. Others are mixed, using different hands depending on the action. This complexity reaches back toward the origin of human movement. The first human hands were not divided by survey categories. They were divided by tasks. One hand might hold while the other struck. One hand might carry while the other adjusted. One hand might guide a sharp edge while the other steadied the material. The body does not always organize itself according to the simple labels that later societies prefer. It organizes itself around action. That is why handedness is best understood as a pattern, not a single test. Modern studies try to measure that pattern, but every method catches only part of it. Culture can also influence whether left-handedness is viewed as ordinary or as a problem. In a society where left-handedness carries stigma, people may be less likely to report it, and families may be more likely to train it away. In a society where it is accepted, the same biological tendency becomes easier to see. This means that differences between countries or communities should be read carefully. They may not show that one population naturally produces far more or far fewer left-handed people. They may show different histories of correction, different school practices, different tools, different meanings of left and right, or different ways of collecting data. The modern world gives us better evidence than the ancient world, but it still does not remove the need for caution. The central pattern remains. Most people use the right hand as the leading hand, while a smaller group uses the left or shows mixed preferences. Around that pattern, the details shift. They shift with age, with culture, with acceptance, and with measurement. This is not a weakness in the story. It is part of the story. Left-handedness has always lived between biology and society. The body produces the variation, and the world decides how visible that variation is allowed to be. Modern records reveal the left hand more clearly because fewer people are forced to hide it, but they also remind us that every number about human beings carries a history of how those human beings were taught to move, answer, and belong. A modern number about left-handedness never tells only a modern story. It also carries the long memory of what people were allowed to show. When a society becomes more accepting of the left hand, the visible minority can appear larger, not because the human body has suddenly changed, but because the old silence has become thinner. This is one of the quiet lessons hidden inside the statistics. The number does not simply measure biology, it measures permission. It measures whether a child was corrected or left alone. It measures whether a teacher saw the left hand as a problem or as a natural difference. It measures whether a family treated unusual movement with worry, shame, patience, or indifference. In this way, the modern world reveals not only the persistence of left-handedness, but also the history of how strongly societies tried to cover it. This makes the familiar minority even more meaningful. Left-handed people are not just a small group produced by development. They are a small group whose visibility has been shaped by centuries of tools, rules, meanings, and expectations. A person born with a left-hand preference may have lived one life in a tolerant environment and a very different life in a strict one. The body may have been similar in both cases, but the public record would not be the same. One culture might count the person as left-handed. Another might train the person into right-handed writing and leave no clear trace of the original preference. The same biological variation can therefore appear differently across history. This is why the question of left-handedness cannot be answered by looking at biology alone. The human hand belongs to the nervous system, but it also belongs to the table, the tool, the classroom, the workshop, and the customs of the group. From the beginning of human action, the hand has always been both physical and social. It reaches because muscles move. It learns because others demonstrate. It becomes skilled because a body repeats what a group values. It becomes judged because communities attach meaning to visible behavior. Modern acceptance allows us to see this more clearly. When fewer children are forced to switch hands, the boundary between natural preference and public performance becomes less distorted. A left-handed child can write with the left hand, eat with the left hand, and grow up without needing to explain why one side feels more natural. That simple permission reveals something that was present before permission existed. It shows that the left-handed minority did not need modern freedom in order to be born. It needed modern freedom in order to be seen. This also teaches caution when imagining the deeper past. We should not picture ancient left-handed people as if they lived exactly like modern left-handed people, surrounded by pens, desks, scissors, and survey forms. But we also should not assume they were absent just because many records are silent. Silence can mean no evidence. It can also mean the wrong kind of evidence was preserved. Stone keeps some movements. Teeth keep some accidents. Walls keep some hand shapes. Written records, when they arrive, keep only what a culture thought worth naming. Beneath all of these layers, the left hand continued as a recurring human possibility. The modern world does not solve the puzzle, but it sharpens it. If left-handedness can become more visible when pressure declines, then part of the old mystery was hidden by culture, yet the deeper mystery remains biological. Why does the variation keep returning at all? Why does the right-handed majority remain so strong, while the left-handed minority never fully disappears? Modern numbers are not final answers. They are clearer mirrors. They show that human populations carry a stable difference beneath changing customs. They show that history can hide a body without removing it. And they remind us that the story of the left hand is also the story of how human societies learn, slowly, to see variation without treating it as error. The familiar figure near 1/10 can make left-handedness sound like a mistake that somehow repeats with surprising regularity. But a recurring minority is not the same as an error. An error has no stable place in the system. It appears randomly, disappears randomly, and carries no clear relationship to the larger pattern around it. Left-handedness does not look like that. It appears too often to be dismissed as a rare accident, yet too rarely to be treated as an equal alternative to right-handedness. It sits in between. That middle position is the clue. A trait that remains small but persistent may be held in place by balance. The right hand stays common because many forces lean toward it. The left hand stays present because those forces do not close every path. This balance is quieter than a dramatic explanation, but it fits the human story more honestly. The right-handed majority likely gained support from many directions at once: brain organization, skilled sequencing, imitation, tool use, social learning, and later cultural expectation. When most people use the right hand, the world becomes easier for right-handed use. Children see more right-handed demonstrations. Tools are shaped around more right-handed bodies. Public gestures and training systems may settle around the same side. The majority reinforces itself, not because anyone planned it at the beginning, but because repeated human action leaves structure behind. A path walked by many feet becomes smoother. A hand used by most people becomes the assumed hand. In that sense, right-handedness is not merely a private preference. It is a population pattern that entered the environment. Yet the left-handed minority never vanished into that environment. This means the pressure of the majority was strong, but not absolute. A left-handed child could still become capable. A left-handed adult could still work, learn, adapt, cooperate, and pass life forward. The mismatch with the right-handed world may have cost effort, but effort is not extinction. Human beings have always lived with imperfect fits between body and environment. Our ancestors adjusted to cold, heat, hunger, injury, terrain, and social tension. A different leading hand was another kind of adjustment, not necessarily a fatal one. This is where the idea of balance becomes important. Left-handedness may be costly in some cooperative settings because it differs from the common pattern. But it may also be maintained by ordinary developmental variation, family tendencies, and occasional advantages of rarity. No one of these explanations needs to be large enough to explain everything. Together, they can keep a trait from being erased. If left-handedness were strongly harmful in all settings, it should become much rarer. If it were strongly helpful in all settings, it should become much more common. The fact that it remains a minority suggests that neither extreme is true. It is not a broken form of human action. It is not a superior form of human action. It is a workable form, held at a low level by the push and pull of many pressures. This returns us to the beginning of human movement. Before writing, before schools, before formal rules about proper hands, the body already had to choose how to act. One hand often led, the other supported. One side became practiced in precision, the other in steadiness. Most nervous systems settled toward the right side for leading action. Some settled toward the left. The human species carried both outcomes forward, not equally, but together. That is why the percentage matters less than the pattern. Around 1 in 10 is not a perfect law. It is a sign that human variation can remain stable without becoming dominant. The left hand survived because evolution is not a search for one flawless body. It is a long negotiation between what helps, what costs, what can be tolerated, and what keeps returning through development. Left-handedness is one of those quiet negotiations written into the human body. If left-handedness carries a possible advantage because it is rare, then that advantage has a built-in limit. It cannot grow forever. The moment a rare pattern becomes common, other people begin to learn it. The surprise fades. The unfamiliar angle becomes familiar. The body that once had to adjust now has practice. This is one reason a minority trait can remain a minority. Its usefulness may depend on not being too widespread. A left-handed movement can be harder to predict, mainly because most people spend more time facing right-handed movement. If many more people became left-handed, the world of movement would change. Children would watch left-handed actions more often. Opponents, playmates, workers, and teachers would gain more experience with left-sided angles. Tools and spaces would become more evenly arranged. The small edge of rarity would weaken because rarity itself would be gone. This does not mean left-handedness exists only because of conflict or surprise. It means that one possible benefit, if it matters at all, cannot push the trait toward becoming universal. It may help keep the left hand present, but it may not help it become dominant. On the other side, if left-handedness became extremely rare, it would not necessarily vanish forever. The biological processes that create handedness would still be operating. Children would still grow through complex development. Genes would still influence probabilities without fixing outcomes. The nervous system would still form asymmetries through timing, movement, and variation. Some bodies would still settle leftward, even in a strongly right-handed world. This is the other half of the balance. The left hand can be pushed down by majority pressure, but it can be brought back by development. Culture can discourage it, but culture does not build the nervous system from nothing. Social expectation may train a child to use the right hand in public, yet the deeper preference may still appear in reaching, throwing, holding, or fine control. In this way, left-handedness is held between two boundaries. It does not spread easily because the right-handed majority has many advantages of familiarity, shared design, and copied movement. It does not disappear easily because human development keeps leaving room for another path. This kind of balance is not unusual in nature. Some traits remain uncommon because their value changes depending on how many individuals carry them. Some variations remain present because the systems that produce them are part of broader developmental processes. Some differences are not beneficial enough to take over, but not harmful enough to be erased. Left-handedness appears to fit this quieter kind of survival. It is not a mistake repeating against all logic. It is a low-level variation supported by more than one source. When we return to the origin of human action, this balance becomes easier to feel. A group of early humans did not need every hand to move the same way. It needed enough shared movement for teaching and cooperation to work. It needed enough flexibility for individuals to solve problems with the bodies they had. The right-handed pattern could become the main road because it made copying, tool habits, and group coordination smoother. The left-handed pattern could remain as a narrower road because it was still livable, still teachable, and sometimes less expected. Neither road had to destroy the other. The majority did not have to become total. The minority did not have to become equal. Human evolution often leaves us with this kind of unfinished arrangement. It does not always answer a problem by removing every alternative. It often holds several possibilities in a population, especially when each possibility has costs in one setting and usefulness in another. The left hand stayed in that space. Too common, and one possible advantage would fade. Too rare, and development would still let it return. Between those pressures, the minority endured, not as a fixed number carved into human nature, but as a recurring sign that human nature itself is made of probabilities, not absolutes. Evolution is often misunderstood as a force that creates the best possible version of a living thing. In that picture, every weakness should vanish, every useful trait should spread, and every species should become cleaner, stronger, and more efficient over time. But the real history of life is not so tidy. Evolution does not design from the beginning with a finished goal in mind. It works with what already exists. It keeps traits that are good enough in a given setting. It carries old compromises into new conditions. It allows variation to remain when the costs are small, when the benefits are occasional, or when the trait is tied to deeper systems that cannot be changed without changing many other things at once. Left-handedness makes sense inside this slower and more imperfect view. It does not look like a trait that should dominate. It also does not look like a trait that should vanish. It looks like one of the many human differences that remain because life can continue with it. The right-handed majority shows the power of shared pattern. Most human bodies lean toward the right hand for skilled action, and that majority has shaped tools, learning, customs, and public expectation for a very long time. The left-handed minority shows the other side of the same truth. A strong pattern does not need to become absolute in order to be strong. Human beings can share a common tendency while still producing bodies that do not fully follow it. This is visible not only in handedness, but across the body and mind. People vary in height, balance, voice, memory, attention, strength, and timing. Some variation is strongly shaped by genes. Some is shaped by development. Some is shaped by culture. Most is shaped by more than one influence at once. Handedness belongs to that complex middle ground. It begins in biology, becomes visible through movement, and is then judged or supported by the social world. That is why it cannot be explained by one simple sentence. A left-handed child is not a failure of right-handed evolution. A right-handed world is not proof that every person should be right-handed. Both facts belong together. The human species became highly coordinated, but not perfectly uniform. From the origin of tool use and learned action, this would have mattered. A group benefits when many people can copy one another easily. A shared direction of movement helps teaching, tool handling, and cooperation. But a group does not require every person to be identical. It requires enough overlap for shared life to work. Left-handed people could still learn the same skills, use the same materials, join the same families, and pass knowledge forward. Their path may have required more adjustment, but adjustment is not unusual in human life. Every body negotiates with the world. Some negotiate with weather, some with injury, some with age, some with tools made for another shape or habit. The left-handed person negotiates with a world that often expects the right hand first. That negotiation has been difficult at times, but not impossible. This is why the idea of perfection is misleading. If evolution were aiming for a perfect tool-using animal, perhaps every hand would follow one standard pattern. But evolution does not need that. It only needs enough bodies to survive and reproduce in real environments. Those environments change. The value of a trait can change with frequency. The development of a trait can return through ordinary biological variation. A social cost can be softened by learning. A rare difference can sometimes carry a small edge because it is less expected. All of these pressures can meet without producing a final winner. The result is not perfect design. It is a living balance. Left-handedness survived because it remained within the range of human possibility. It was not too costly to endure. It was not useful enough to become the rule. It was not shallow enough for culture to erase. It was not separate enough from development for biology to close it off completely. It stayed where many human traits stay, in the open space between advantage and disadvantage. That space is not empty. It is where much of human variation lives. The left hand, uncommon but persistent, reminds us that our species was not shaped by a demand for sameness. We were shaped by workable bodies, repeating patterns, flexible learning, and differences that could continue without breaking the chain of generations. Left-handedness tells us something gentle but important about being human. We are not a single pattern copied without change from one generation to the next. We are a species of strong tendencies and quiet exceptions. Most people share a right-handed preference, and that majority has shaped tools, classrooms, customs, and expectations for a very long time. Yet within that same species, the left-handed minority keeps appearing. It does not appear as an outsider to humanity. It appears from within the same developmental systems, the same families, the same nervous structures, the same long history of reaching, grasping, making, and learning. This is what makes the left hand meaningful. It shows that human nature is not a narrow corridor. It is a landscape with a main path and smaller paths, each formed by bodies trying to act in the world. The right hand may be the more common path, worn smooth by repetition and shared design, but the left hand remains a path too, old enough to leave traces in tools, tooth marks, movement, and modern lives. When we look at it this way, left-handedness stops looking like a question of defect. It becomes a question of variation. A left-handed person does not need to be explained as a problem that survived by mistake. A left-handed person also does not need to be turned into a symbol of special power. Both extremes are too simple. The deeper truth is more useful. Human beings are built with room for difference. That room is not always comfortable. Difference can meet resistance. A world shaped around the majority can ask the minority to adapt again and again, but the existence of that minority shows that human life has never required perfect uniformity. From the beginning of our story, people survived by sharing enough similarity to cooperate and enough flexibility to include variation. A group could teach a skill even when not every child copied it in exactly the same direction. A person could learn a tool even when the tool felt more natural in the other hand. A body could carry a different pattern and still belong to the same community of work, care, danger, and memory. This matters beyond handedness. Many human differences live in this same space. They are neither pure advantages nor pure disadvantages. They change their meaning depending on the environment. And a lesson. Change. A trait that is inconvenient in one setting may be neutral in another. A difference that is hidden under strict social rules may become ordinary when those rules soften. A body that seems mismatched to a tool may reveal that the tool was designed too narrowly. Left-handedness teaches this in a simple physical way. It asks us to notice how easily the majority becomes invisible to itself. Right-handed people often move through a world that fits them without seeing the fit. Left-handed people are more likely to feel the seam between body and design. That seam is not only personal, it is historical. It was made by generations of repeated right-handed use, then preserved in objects, habits, and institutions. When the seam becomes visible, it teaches us that what feels natural is often partly built. This brings the story back to the origin of human action. Before there were written rules, before there were classrooms, before there were tools labeled for one hand or the other, there was the human body reaching into the world. The hand touched material, the brain predicted movement, the group watched and copied. Skill passed from one person to another through gesture, rhythm, and practice. In that ancient process, most bodies leaned one way and some leaned another. Both were human. Both belonged to the same long experiment of survival through movement and memory. The left hand remained because the human species was never a finished mold. It was a living population, full of probabilities, balances, and small differences that could continue. To understand left-handedness, then, is to understand something larger. Evolution did not make us identical. It made us related. It gave us shared patterns strong enough to build cultures, and variations persistent enough to remind us that no majority is the whole of humanity. Left-handedness also teaches us to think about evolution more slowly. It is easy to imagine evolution as a hard force that removes weakness and keeps only what wins. But the human body is not a list of perfect solutions. It is a record of compromises that were good enough to carry life forward. Walking upright freed the hands, but it also changed the spine, hips, knees, and birth. A large brain gave humans memory, planning, language, and imagination, but it also required long childhood, care, teaching, and dependence. The hand itself became a powerful tool, but only because it worked inside a body that was never simple. Left-handedness belongs to this same world of compromise. It shows that a trait can remain even when it is not the easiest fit for the surrounding environment. It can remain because its costs are limited, because its source lies deep in development, because the population can tolerate variation, and because the value of a difference may change from one setting to another. This is why left-handedness should not be treated as a failed attempt at right-handedness. It is one of the quieter results of a flexible biological system. The right-handed majority shows that humans are strongly patterned. The left-handed minority shows that the pattern does not close completely. Between those two facts is a more realistic picture of evolution. It does not always produce one final answer. It often produces a range of workable answers, with one becoming common and others remaining possible. This matters because human beings have often confused commonness with correctness. When most people use the right hand can begin to feel normal in a moral sense, not only a statistical sense. From there, societies may build tools, rules, and expectations as if the majority body were the only body. But biology keeps showing otherwise. Each new generation includes children whose movement begins from a different side. Their existence does not break the human pattern. It reveals the pattern's edges. It shows where shared design ends and individual development begins. This is a valuable lesson because many human differences are like this. They are not simple defects, and they are not simple gifts. They become easier or harder depending on the world around them. A body can be made uncomfortable by a badly designed object. A child can be made ashamed by a rule that mistakes difference for disorder. A person can be counted wrongly when society measures only the behavior it has trained them to show. Left-handedness makes these ideas visible through the hand, which is why the subject feels so close to daily life. The hand is not abstract. It is how a person opens a door, holds a cup, writes a name, prepares food, carries weight, and touches another human being. From the beginning of human history, hands were where thought met matter. They shaped stone, held firewood, cleaned food, carried infants, and copied the movements of others. In that ancient meeting between body and world, variation was already present. Most hands led from the right, some led from the left. The left hand remained because evolution is not a command for sameness. It is a slow process in which life continues through bodies that are similar enough to share a world, yet different enough to show that no single form contains all of humanity. This makes left-handedness more than a curiosity. It becomes a small lesson in humility. The human story was not written by perfect design. It was written by workable bodies, inherited tendencies, social pressure, and the quiet survival of differences that could still belong. The left hand reminds us that being uncommon is not the same as being unnatural. It is one way the human body keeps telling the truth about itself, that life is not built from one pattern alone, but from a balance of patterns that continue. The left hand remains because human life was never built from one perfect rule. It remains because a body can be different and still belong. Across this long path, the question has changed shape. At first, left-handedness seemed like a contradiction, a minority trait living inside a world that usually favors the right hand. Then it became a biological question, tied to the brain, development, inheritance, and the way the nervous system organizes skilled action. Then it became an archaeological question, appearing faintly in marks, tools, teeth, and traces of ancient work. Then it became a social question, shaped by classrooms, customs, tools, rituals, and the pressure to make visible bodies fit the majority. Each layer added something, but none of them gave a final, simple answer. That is important. Some questions about human beings are best answered not by one sharp conclusion, but by seeing how many quiet forces meet in the same place. Left-handedness sits at such a meeting place. It may carry small costs in a right-handed environment. It may carry small advantages when rarity changes expectation. It may keep returning because development leaves room for variation. It may stay uncommon because the right-handed majority continues to be reinforced by learning, design, and shared habit. Together, these forces do not form a dramatic secret. They form a balance, and that balance is the real lesson. Difference does not always need to be explained as damage. It also does not need to be praised beyond evidence. A careful respect is enough. A left-handed person is not proof that evolution failed, and not proof that evolution made a hidden superior type. A left-handed person is proof that human nature is wider than the most common form of it. This matters because societies often turn majority patterns into silent standards. What most people do begins to feel like what everyone should do. The right hand becomes the normal hand. The common body becomes the expected body. The tool is designed for the many, and the few are asked to adjust. But when we look closely, we see that the few were there all along. They were not outside the story. They were carried inside it, generation after generation, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, sometimes corrected, sometimes accepted. The left hand is a small reminder that a species can be deeply patterned without being uniform. From the beginning of human action, our ancestors survived because they could learn together. They copied, taught, adapted, remembered, and worked with the bodies they had. Most hands led from the right, and that common direction helped shape human culture. But some hands led from the left, and those hands also shaped stone, gathered food, held children, made gestures, carried tools, and passed life forward. The educational value of this story is simple and quiet. When we meet a difference that has lasted for a very long time, we should not rush to call it a flaw. We should ask what kind of world made it difficult, what kind of body made it possible, and what kind of balance allowed it to remain. This question reaches beyond hands. It asks us to look at human variation with patience instead of fear. A body that does not match the majority may be carrying an old compromise, an alternate route through the same human landscape. A quiet reminder that survival has never required every person to move in exactly the same way. Left-handedness teaches that being uncommon is not the same as being wrong. It teaches that the human body carries history not only through what most people share, but also through what a smaller number quietly preserve. And perhaps that is why the left hand is still here, moving beside the right hand through time, asking a question that stays open in the human body itself. If evolution did not erase this difference, what else inside us has survived not because it was perfect, but because it was still human?